we're going to go over some of the chapters from Old Path White Cloud, and some of the chapters are posted on Facebook, the Facebook group for people to listen to the audio if they want to. But starting from chapter 1, I'll begin with a summary. The Buddha stopped by Uravela village, which is Savasi's home, along the Naranjara River in order to bring Savasi back to the bamboo forest monastery in Rajaha for ordination. Savasi becomes acquainted with Rahula, who was the Buddha's son at that time. So there are many key points I would like to talk about, and along the way I'll offer some of Master's correction that he inputted as well. I'll make note when I mention his corrections. So, about 10 years ago, the Buddha told Savasi that one day he will come back to retrieve him to join the monkhood. And 10 years later, which is where this particular story takes place, the Buddha came back. So, as we know, the Buddha is an enlightened being, someone who has awakened to the way, hence the name Buddha. Bud means to awaken. So this little exchange here, we learned that when you meet someone who's enlightened, or you meet someone who's attained the way, you can always trust what they will say, and that they will always keep their words. So there's no need for them to promise you anything, and there's no need for them to proclaim anything, because what they say, they will do. So the short exchange, we saw that the Buddha told Savasi 10 years ago that he will come back to pick up Savasi. And 10 years later, the Buddha did that. He never forgets the promises that he makes, or the things that he promises that he will do. But one very interesting note here is that Savasi family knew that he was going to become a monk, and they wholeheartedly supported him to become a monk. So why do some families support a person to become a monk, and why do some families resist their loved ones to become a monk? I think it's simply due to karma, and each person's difficulty is a lesson for them to learn, and each person has to overcome their karma or learn their lessons ultimately on their own, and if they're lucky enough, they will have a master to guide them along the way. So everything in life, whether it be good or bad, displeasure or pleasure, is due to the seeds that we have planted in the past. And seeds is a metaphor or analogy to the karmic deeds that we have committed. We've committed good karmic deeds in the past, and we have also committed bad karmic deeds in the past. So part of cultivation here is we have to patiently endure our suffering, meaning that the bad seeds that we have planted in the past, we have to be able to pay back that debt, which means that we have to suffer. That's why we're paying it back. We have to slowly pull out the bad seeds that we have planted and plant good ones. That is what cultivation is about. So what does it mean to be patient? What I mentioned earlier. A patient means to endure what others cannot endure. Patient means also to give up what others can't give up. So when you're cultivating, it is extremely important to be patient. You shouldn't expect fast results, especially when you're trying to become enlightened, and especially when you're walking the spiritual path. You can't expect to have any fruitful results in a day, or even decades sometimes, or maybe even your whole life you won't ever reach there. But you have to keep trying. That is the main point of cultivation. And Master had some of his own points that he would like to point out as well. He mentioned that karma isn't about what we owe, right? But karma also comes about out of our ignorance. What does that mean? I mean, it's because of our ignorance that we plant bad seeds. It is because of our ignorance that we do bad things. And so we have to learn, again, with patience, to pull out and correct our faults, so that we can create good karma, so that in our next life we will continue to grow spiritually. And in terms of patient, Master also points out that we have to have patience to learn. What does that mean? Because what does that mean, patience, in the sense that he's talking about? When you're trying to become enlightened, or when you're cultivating spiritually, you're aiming to become a perfect person, like Jesus or like Buddha. People view them as perfect beings, but they have the patience throughout their entire life to constantly cultivate, virtue, morality, and ethics. But as we know, knowledge is never ending, and so part of cultivation, Master pointed out, is that we have to learn what we need to learn. You don't have to learn everything. That's a key point here. So when you're maybe reading like the Buddha's teaching, or you're reading the Bible, simply try to understand what you need to understand. You don't have to know everything. And we will talk about why you don't have to know everything in future chapters that Doom Si Mei Jiang or the Old Path White Clyde touches upon. And the reason why you don't have to learn everything, especially when you have a teacher, Master continues to point out, is that when they feel like you've learned more, or you've mastered what has been taught, they will naturally teach you more. Right? You do not need to go seeking for knowledge. You should read up and try to be more educated, try to be more knowledgeable in whatever you're practicing, but there's no need for you to be a bookworm, is the main point here. So continuing with the story, on the way back to the bamboo forest monastery, the book mentioned that every action the Buddha made, whether it be walking or eating or sitting, was very mindful. And a point to note here is that the Buddha and the rest of the Sangha, and Sangha means the group of monks that follows the Buddha, they walk with great peace and tranquility. And you can see that every action of the Buddha was mindful, which is also a way to cultivate. So in our journey in cultivation should be the same way. We should practice with mindfulness, with diligence, but not with an intense desire to achieve enlightenment. Master also mentioned that the more you want to become enlightened, the more you won't be enlightened. So just practice what you've taught, whether that be selflessness, kindness, or compassion, or whatever your spiritual teacher teaches you. Just practice with great peace, tranquility, and diligence, and not expect to be enlightened within a day or 2 days or a year. Just keep practicing. Continuing with the story, so after coming back to the bamboo forest monastery, Savasti had to beg for food. It was a very common practice back then for the Buddha and his sanghas, or his monks and nuns, to go out begging for food. And Savasti realized that begging for food was a way to practice the way, and the way here means to cultivate. So from my point of view, what is begging for food is a way to cultivate the way. One of the Master mentioned that one of the first major obstacles that we face in cultivation is transforming our ego to wisdom and compassion. And the ego manifests itself in many ways. And begging for food, just like prostration to someone who's highly enlightened, is another form, or another way, another method for you to lose your ego. Just for that moment, though. Because once you stop prostrating, your ego comes right back. So begging for food is also the same way. You're humbling yourself before another person, begging them for their food. It's a way for you to slowly remove their ego, slowly to practice selflessness. It is also to remind the monk that they rely on the people for food, because back then you're not allowed to cook. You're only allowed to eat what you're given, whether it be spoiled food or very delicious food. You can't complain what people give you. You eat simply what they give you. And that's a way to practice kindness and compassion. Or how does that practice, or how does that cultivate kindness, compassion? Because when you're begging for food, especially back in the Buddha's time, you know that your livelihood, that you don't go hungry and die, is based purely on the kindness and compassion of other people. Like I said, you're not allowed to cook. You can only beg for food to eat. So we notice here that everything that they do, from walking to begging for food, what is that? What is the commonality between those 2 points? And to practice the way means to practice. You can't find the way in books, in the sutras, or in the Bible even. You have to practice the teaching. So to realize or to become enlightened, you have to practice. And even if you have a great teacher, if you don't practice the teaching, you won't grow. Just like a small plant, you have to water it every day. You have to put it in sunlight, make sure that it has enough food for it to grow. You can read about how to plant a plant, how to water a plant, but if you don't actually do it, nothing will happen. So in the process of begging food, he's actually practicing. Savasi doesn't know a lot about sutras. He doesn't know a lot about. He's not highly educated, and we'll go into why he's not highly educated in further chapters. But you can already see that no matter how uneducated you are, you can still practice. So there's no excuse there. And then this is something that I learned from Master. And to practice the way, you must have three important characteristics. And if you don't have them, you have to cultivate them. So, what are the three things that Master talks about? The first one is perseverance, the second one is honesty, and the last one is determination. And the three things, those three characteristics, the common thing that they have in common, if you kind of contemplate on them, is don't give up. You have to be sincere in your practice. That's honesty. Don't lie. If you fail, say you fail, and if you did something wrong, um, confess, accept it, and then learn from it, and then move on. But perseverance and determination is not giving up, because on this path of spirituality and cultivation, you will be faced with many tests and many challenges to see if you're actually really into it and that you're not faking it, or is this not some sort of fad, right? So you have to constantly cultivate perseverance, honesty, and determination to actually make progress. So just don't give up and practice. And then Master mentioned many other points in terms of chapter one. And like I mentioned before, Master mentioned that begging for food is one way of to let go of the ego, and another way of the word ego is the self. You have to let go of your sense of I. And many thousands of years ago, people would donate you food from their plates. So really, you eat what people give you. You really don't have any other choice. You can't say that I don't want that food. I'm not going to accept it, right? But now, Master mentioned that in modern Thailand, it is actually quite different now. People, when monks go begging now in Thailand, they actually get very delicious food, maybe food that's even better than what people have at home. But that's not actually a bad thing. It shows you that the faith, the respect of that the Thai people has actually grown tremendously. That they're willing to give you the best food that they don't have, maybe not can't afford to eat every day. They would actually spend the money to cook that and give it to the monks. So we can see that Buddhism throughout history has grown, it has evolved, and this process of begging for food has actually fostered faith and respect for spirituality in people, especially the Thai people. And that is the end of chapter 1. Going to chapter 2, this is the summary. The Buddha delivered the sutras on tending water buffaloes, and Savasti confides to Rahula, again the Buddha's son, that he is homesick. And Rahula tells Savasti that Venerable Ananda wishes to meet him. So many years ago, when Savasti first met the Buddha, he told the Buddha about how he takes cares of water buffaloes. And the Buddha, being of course very intelligent and attained the way at this point, was able to use that knowledge that Savasti gave him and turn it into a sutra that taught people how to cultivate. But for me, that's not the most important point of this chapter. The most, I guess, most interesting thing was about Venerable Ananda. And any Buddhist would know that Ananda had perfect memory. He was and he was very knowledgeable about everything that the Buddha taught. You could come to Ananda and ask anything about what the Buddha said, whether it be yesterday or 10 years ago. He would know exactly what the Buddha said and what he meant. So there are many key points here, and Master went into many details and key points that I will talk about because it's, I think, a very important distinction and topic to delve into is knowledge. What Ananda had was knowledge. He had enormous knowledge. He basically served the Buddha most of his life and remembered everything that the Buddha taught. So his knowledge was very vast and very deep, and the Buddha taught him, I think, almost everything, right? But we have to be careful here. Knowledge is a good way to start when someone is practicing spirituality or cultivation, but like I mentioned in the last chapter, to practice spirituality and to cultivate means you have to practice it. You can't read it, you can't memorize it. You have to know the path, right? But you have to walk the path as well. And knowledge is extremely superficial. You don't realize the truth. You haven't attained to the truth or spiritual truth. You may know, for instance, enlightenment, but you may know the word enlightenment, but have you attained enlightenment? Those are two very different things. So knowledge is, you have to have knowledge in order to know where you're going, but you actually have to still walk the path. But also another dangerous thing that Master also mentioned is that knowledge can actually act as a barrier. And what do I mean by barrier? It means it can stop you from cultivating, impede you. It can become an obstacle. Knowledge makes one arrogant, especially if you know too much. For example, if you know too much about the Buddha's teaching and someone who is enlightened comes to try to teach you, you might not want to listen to them because you think that you know everything. So Master mentioned that enlightenment is not something that you finish a course in or a certificate that you get. It is the result of your hard work and practice. And this is heavily dependent upon your past life. So what does Master mean by dependent upon your past lives? It means that what you achieve today is a direct result of what you did in the past. So let's say you created extremely heavy karma in the past. That karma will come back and stop you from cultivating, actually, until you pay it back. So that's why I mentioned in chapter 1, and Master mentioned, you have to be patient. You have to be patient. You constantly have to grow. You constantly have to be willing to pay back your karma and suffer when you pay back your karma so that you can actually have a chance to grow. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't be afraid. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't stop cultivating because you're afraid of the karma. It means exactly the opposite, that you should continue to walk forward. And when you reach enlightenment, or when you merge with the flow, which we will talk about later, we are mainly concerned with lessons to improve our spirituality. So that means that before we merge with the flow, we will always be making good karma and bad karma because we're ignorant. We don't know what we're doing. But once you become enlightened, you can only grow in basically a non-regressional path from there, because everything that you do is basically to help you grow. You're not committing karma at that point anymore. And Master further went on to say that one of the most important things in spirituality and in cultivation is finding an authentic teacher and the most important thing is to recognize our teacher. So, why is it important to find an authentic teacher? It is important to find an authentic teacher because that person can actually guide you properly. And what do I mean by authentic teacher? It means someone who is enlightened, basically. So again, in order to find an authentic teacher, again, is also heavily dependent upon your past merit and your past karma as well. Because there are many people who are sincere spiritual seekers or people who want to cultivate sincerely, and they search for their entire life and they never find a teacher. So part of it you can say is kind of destiny, but don't think that destiny means that you're doomed not to find a teacher. It just simply means that there are forces at play that either help you to find a teacher or prevent you from finding one. But it is quite important to find one if you can. I think your progress would be much faster if you're able to find an authentic teacher as opposed to trying to cultivate by yourself, because it is much harder that way. Master then further mentioned that learning and to be spiritually successful is also about competency and not diligent. Now, what does that mean? He mentioned, or Master mentioned, that you can be diligent, but that doesn't mean that you will go very far. Like a water buffalo, for instance. They're very hardworking, but if they don't work smart, then they're kind of stuck, basically. They don't know where they should improve on, where they're ignorant in, and where their weak points are. That's why you need competency, and which goes back to the point of an authentic spiritual teacher that Master mentioned. Because if you have an authentic teacher, they can actually see you're ignorant. So they know how to train you, they know how to push you in a certain direction so that you can grow. But if you don't have a teacher, then it's actually very hard and even dangerous for you to practice by yourself if you don't have a teacher. But again, like I said, be patient and try your best. And don't be afraid to move forward and pay back your karma. It is also important that when we practice diligence and competence that we have to be mindful. And being mindful here means that we recognize what we have to do, right? But you need the diligence to actually go do it. You can recognize that maybe you need to read up on a certain teaching that your master recommends. But if you don't have the diligence, you won't do it. So again, it's competency, diligence is extremely important. You have to have both to progress. And it is only by doing things, the practicing of what your teacher taught you, can you realize the truth. It's not just knowledge. Yes, they can teach you something, but you actually have to practice it to make that truth your own wisdom. So you should never ever lose track of your advancement in your spiritual path. And it is important that if you want to find your true self or come back to the cosmic parent, that you have to have that characteristic. You cannot lose track of the reason why you cultivate. Because when you cultivate, there are many things that can pull you away from your path. Right. So if you don't have a teacher, let's say you don't have a teacher, what do? Not everyone is lucky enough to have an authentic teacher. So, Master also further explains that if you don't have a teacher, try your best to encode only good things. Try your best. And what does it mean by encode? It means to do good deeds, to practice kindness and compassion, to practice selflessness. Try to only do that, because in your next life, you might have accrue enough karmic deeds and enough merit that will lead you to find an authentic teacher. So before then, before you become enlightened, or if you're not lucky enough to find a spiritual teacher, try to only do good deeds and try not to commit any wrongful action against another human being or to do something that is evil, because that will only hurt you in the end. And when karma comes, when you have to be, and when bad karma comes and you have to pay it back, if you accept it willingly, it's much cheaper. So don't chide yourself. Don't complain why life is so hard, or don't complain about the bad predicament that you find yourself in. Master again says that it's much better to accept the karma, pay it back without complaining, finish it, learn from it, and move forward. The important thing here is that you learn a lot more from paying back your karma actually than making good ones. Because when you pay back your karma, you're learning a lesson about why you made that karma in the first place. And that will actually help you grow. So don't be afraid to pay back your karma. So encode only good things in your life and pay back your karma and continue your path in your next life. Going to chapter 3, the summary is